Thank you again to MBS Canada for presenting this session in the Framing the Future series. And with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel. So first we have Jeff Harvey. Jeff is a rigging gaffer and electrician from Vancouver. Jeff has been involved in the Vancouver City Green Initiative and Real Green Initiative for the past 3 years. Hi, Jeff. Chris Hatcher is currently producing multiple series for Netflix, including Painkiller, directed by Peter Berg, and Sex Life with exec producer J. Miles Dale. Chris is also the founding partner and operator of Aspect Film Studios in Toronto with over 250,000 square feet that includes multiple sound stages, offices, lockups, mills, and more. Hey, Chris. Katharine Pavoni is the manager of industry and community affairs at the Provincial Film Commission at Creative BC. She also currently chairs the Clean Energy Committee at Real Green. Hey, Katharine. And finally, also joining us from BC, we have generator operator Mike Stroman. And now I will pass it off to our moderator for this session, Inayat Singh. Inayat is a national environment and climate change reporter at CBC News Toronto. He covers energy policy, climate politics, environmental conservation, and homegrown climate solutions. Thank you so much, everyone, and welcome.
Thanks, Katie. It's great to be here. Good to have all of you, and it's I'm looking forward to this conversation and learning a bit about this topic myself. Just to start it off, though, I wanted to get a little personal and ask why. Why do we do this work? What are your personal motivations? I'll start with Katharine.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I think personally, I've worked in the film industry for quite some time now, since I was a teenager, and I've seen the impact it can have, not just sustainability wise, but also on communities. And my work at the Film Commission has been to work really closely with all the municipal film offices and the people out there where we film our projects. And the number one thing that comes up over and over again is concern about the use of diesel generators. So it's sort of a no-brainer to be involved in trying to pull back on their use. I also just have a very keen interest in what we can do as individuals to promote change. And I think that that's sort of, for me, why I'm involved in this piece, is to get more people interested in what we can do.
That's great. Thanks, Katharine. Jeff, what about you? Oh, you're still muted.
Hello.
There we go.
There we go. I've been doing this for 25 years, generator operator, and now rigging gaffer. And like Katharine says, we deal with a lot of upset people that don't like our generators. They're spewing diesel exhaust outside their doors all day, and it's hard to find people that'll let you tie into their systems or educate them. So, we've worked hard to quiet our diesel generators, and now we got battery packs that we're working toward. And I got pulled into this a few years ago by Colleen and Clara in Vancouver for a green initiative through the city of Vancouver. And I've sort of jumped on board and sort of run with it now. And I've been having some success and some failures, but we seem to be winning more than we're losing lately. So it's pretty good.
That's great, and good to have your experience on here. I'll go to Mike next. What's your thoughts?
I've just always really been interested in alternate power supplies. Once we got involved with Clara George, and she explained to me that Vancouver is one of the biggest consumers of diesel in the world in film communities. So I'm like, that's really ridiculous, and that's kind of been the driving thing to get something different going on. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And Chris.
Yeah, I think I've just, like all of us, have seen the effects of climate change in the world, and knowing that we all have to do our part, and then being a part of the film industry, and we have many different scales of productions that we all work in, and yeah, we can burn a lot of fuel if we're not being really intentional about how much fuel we burn, or trying to reduce the amount of fuel we burn. And so on one of my most recent productions last summer in partnership with Netflix and Clara George, who's mentioned earlier, and I imagine will probably come up again from time to time on this call, as she's sort of a pioneer in this work in Vancouver and in Canada. Yeah, we had a goal of trying to burn as little fuel as possible on a really big production, and saw it, witnessed it, and was a part of it being really successful. And so, yeah, want to spread the good word and just get as many people on board to do the same.
That's great. Well, it's good to hear all your motivations. Let's get into it. So I wanted to start off with, just looking at what clean energy is, what it means to be clean on set. And we have a brief presentation on grid tie-in. So I'll get Katharine to start us off, and Mike and Jeff will also kind of jump in to explain what grid tie-in actually means.
Thanks so much. So when we started the Clean Energy Committee about 3 years ago, I think the biggest question that came up over and over again was, what is clean energy, and what are our options to not use diesel? So just as a really quick definition, in general, a grid tie-in, which is a phrase that we use all the time in the motion picture industry, would be either temporary or permanent access to energy that actually comes from the grid. So here in BC, we're very lucky, it's hydroelectric, so it's quite a clean grid. Other places in the world are not so lucky, but regardless, the option to use a grid versus diesel is a cleaner option. If we can't access the grid, which does happen from time to time as we shoot in all sorts of places, the middle of the desert, in the forest, et cetera, et cetera. There is now new technology, including battery power generators or hybrid use, where we're using a bit of diesel and a bit of battery, where we can kind of work around not having access to the grid. I think the thing that's very confusing for people who are interested and want to engage with, the clean energy group, or what can I do with my building or my stage, et cetera, is they don't really know where to start, because it's a very technical piece. And there's lots of different ways that you can tie into a grid. So I'll maybe get Mike to start by sort of talking about what would be our traditional studio use, which is house power.
Yeah, well, typically all of the studios are connected to the grid to some extent. Sometimes they don't have quite as much as we need, but all of them, and the more and more they build, have bigger and better power systems for us. And it's simply a plug and play scenario. We show up and plug into compatible equipment that we use, and that's that, right? But we don't have to run generators when we're there.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah. So when we're referring to house power, that's something that's been set up for us, and it's very easy to use, which is why it's in most of the stages. The next option would be something that is, we call it semi-permanent power. So something that exists that we have to either open or access in some way. So Jeff, do you maybe want to speak to what happens over at the Vancouver Art Gallery?
The Vancouver Art Gallery, they provided us with 5 access points now around their property, and they've gone underground, buried it all, and tied it in underneath various benches and in gardens for us. So it's discreet, you can't see it from the street. It's inaccessible because it's got safety screws that they have to remove for us. And then it's strictly a straight on cam lock in, cam lock out. And it's good for not only film, it's good for entertainment events as well that they put on there. So they can tie right into that power. And there's ample power there now, because they've now done north and south side of the building, so that we can access that. And they give it to us at they give it to production at a cheaper rate than what it charges us for a generator. And being in the downtown core of Vancouver, there's become very, very little places for our equipment to even park, let alone shoot a show there. So, and park a generator is getting more and more difficult, because there's just more bike lanes and more greenery patches, and the show, it goes on and on and on. So it's become technically more difficult for us to get the equipment in to where we want it. So these sort of PowerPoints are becoming very advantageous and very likable for productions to go and seek after them and use them.
For sure. And an interesting note about that is the power had sort of always been there, but it wasn't quite compatible with the motion picture industry. So all it took was somebody, inquiring about why they weren't being used and then doing some work to upgrade, and then bingo, super accessible, and everyone is sort of on board with it, which I think is an important note. And when we call it semi-permanent, it's just because, as Jeff said, someone has to actually unscrew it and give us access, and the equipment goes away. So when we're all done for the day, it's all wrapped up and you can't even tell it's there. I would say another example that maybe Mike can speak to is what we're referring to as temporary tie-ins at a location that doesn't have a setup for film option. Mike, do you want to sort of speak to some locations that would have something like that available?
Specific locations, I'm not 100% sure. I know that from time to time we go into different locations where they have a large electrical service in it, and quickly realize that, well, where they're filming, they're not going to be using very much of their power at all. It gives us the option to tie into existing switches or panel boards, whatever they have, that we can alternatively draw off of rather than run our generators.
Awesome. And this is what we've been pushing with the Clean Energy Committee, is asking the question, can we tie in to existing power? Because that's something that often doesn't come up until much later in prep. And then at that point, sometimes it's a little too late in the game. So really trying to shift the mindset to always be asking that question right off. Can we tie into any existing power before we bring in a diesel generator? And then I would say the last example here, which is, also Chris could speak to this, because I know that they're getting their own purpose-built kiosks in the city of Toronto, as well as in the city of Vancouver. There was some amazing work that was done by the film office here, Jeff Tioli, to actually build out these purpose-built kiosks. Jeff, I think you were involved in some of the process, getting them up and running. Do you want to speak to them?
Yeah, so in the city of Vancouver here, down in Concord, which is down by the waterfront, we have a large vacant land there that we use for circuses and film parking and etc. And they came to us with a design build, and myself and Simon Hunt and Keith Woods had input on it, and Hugh Meikle, and we came up with this design. They also talked to live entertainment people about their needs. And there's an ample amount of power down there because it used to be an old industrial site. So there's a lot of power that Hydro has to offer us. So they've purposely built 3 of these units for us, east, west, and center on their property. And they're being installed they should be installed by the middle of July, I believe, and up and operational. They tried to get them in earlier, but they ran into some technical difficulties, but they're moving forward with them. And they're also trying to put one downtown, further downtown, I believe. There's some more sites that they're speccing for this. And there again, it's going to be not just for us, it's for live entertainment as well, to use. So, we'll be the big customer, and then the small customer will be the live entertainment venues that they can use them.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. And I think that wraps up our quick little overview of what a grid tie-in is.
Thanks, Katharine. That's great. Lots of useful information. And I guess building off of that, I wanted to tap into, some of the experience of all of you on the panel, and basically discuss examples of some of the leading solutions we have out there to minimize fuel. What has worked for you in the past or more recently? Chris, let's start with you.
Yeah. Recently, is last summer, this time last year, I did a series, a 6-episode, hour-long series with Netflix, and we went into that with the goal to burn as little fuel as possible. Our approaches were grid tie-ins wherever possible, and electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles, working with our vendors to encourage them to bring on enough supply so that they could supply us with rentals for electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles. Battery packs that Katharine spoke about that we saw on the slides. So UPS battery packs or volt stacks, and efficient trailers, so battery powered hair makeup trailers where possible. And then being really conscious about our unit moves. So where and how we move our unit on a day-to-day basis, and particularly like at the end of a week where it moves and where it's going to have to live over the weekend to be kept, hot and ready, or cool and ready in the summertime. So those were our sort of main approaches. And we also brought on a sustainability steward to our production. So someone whose goal is monitoring all the things I just spoke about. So generator usage, to monitor diesel that's being burned, the battery packs, the mileage on the electronic vehicles or gas powered vehicles, so that at the end of our production, we could generate like a really concise electrification analysis. And so those were our sort of main approaches. And I think overall it was a success, like we were nervous going into it just because, the stakes are high in production. You have sort of a limited amount of days to get a whole bunch done creatively, and you're spending a lot of money really quickly. On the course of a series or a movie, it's where you're spending the most money. And then sort of like bringing in a new thing like a battery powered generator, or once there was a diesel powered generator, can be scary for productions. And so since it was our first time doing that, we oftentimes had backups to start. And we learned really quickly that they're super reliable and useful. And so, I think on that production, we avoided burning like 17,000 liters of diesel, 7,000 liters of gas, and we saved over 52 metric tons of CO2 emissions over the period of about 3 months of production.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
And I find it interesting how you went in very deliberately with this approach of cutting fuel use. And I wanted to ask Jeff, are you seeing similar things happen?
Yeah, I do a series here for Netflix called Virgin River. So we're starting season 5. And in season 4, we literally tracked our generator usage, location, and loads 3 times a day. And this all went back to a main data point. It was just literally a simple system of scanning it and plugging in the numbers each time. And Claire George and her team over there gathered all this data for us, so we could track that. We were fortunate enough to have access to 2 of their large towable generator units. So we used them exclusively where we could. Where we still have problems with using them is like for the big night shoots, when you have a lot of lights, big lights up in the air, of course, trying to do a big night shoot, as Chris probably knows as well. So, but for most of the day work, we were able to use a lot of the electric generators and the portable, smaller push around units. We took it on. We always had a diesel sitting in the back corner, and we went literally weeks with some of them just sitting there, not working at all, just waiting to be pulled off, and just in case. But we were pretty fortunate that we were able to. Our studio is completely off of the grid now. We've managed to rewire a few things and change a few more things, and their circus has been changed again this year, going into season 5, that most of the lights in most of their trailers are all LED now. So their power consumption has dropped considerably. We're looking forward to that. That was one of our big problems last year, trying to get the circus units lower consumption. So I think we've achieved that, and we're going to have more electric cars this year than we did last year. So it'll be good this year because we'll have a base from last year that we started with, and we had the previous year's data as well. So we're going to see another decline. We declined by about 22% last year, and we saved, I don't know, 50,000 tons of carbon, whatever number that Claire came up with. It was pretty staggering actually for 5 months, and not really we tried to help, but you never know how successful you're going to be until you see the numbers at the end. Like I'm sure Chris was quite surprised as well. So we're starting season 5 now. So by November, I'll have more data for you.
Yeah, that the amount of carbon that you kept from the atmosphere, like it's pretty significant. Mike, what are you seeing?
My experience has been pretty similar to Jeff's. we did a feature last year called The Mother. We were up in Smithers for a month in the wintertime. It was, really cold, and most of our equipment was powering heaters rather than lights. But we had good fortune of having one of the MBS UPS generators with us. And Clara and her team tracked all of our consumption, same kind of deal. And we saved a tremendous amount of fuel and carbon just by running them just for the work trucks. We left set alone. Set ran off the generators because you never know what's going to happen on set, but the work trucks are a constant. And we ran electric probably 65% of the time. And very, very effective way of dealing with trucks and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Just going back to Chris for a second, you tracked a lot of metrics on your project, and I was wondering if you can speak to the financial savings from cutting back on diesel.
Yeah, I think going into it, we were equally as nervous just trying something new as we were about sort of the premium cost of these battery pack rentals, because they are a little bit more expensive, at the moment than diesel generators. At least they were that particular summer. And what we learned is that the premium costs of actually everything, in fact, not just the battery packs, but the electric vehicles, et cetera, were almost entirely offset by the fuel savings that we had at the end of the production. So it's a hard thing to sort of wrap your head around. If there's any production managers or producers listening, it's because we have our budget lines for these vehicles and these generators. And so, plugging that in initially, they can increase looking at the battery packs. But what you need to keep in mind is your fuel savings in a different line are definitely going to reduce. Like we saw that it was as clear as black and white.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, how about you? You mentioned your studio has, made the switch to be completely tied to the grid. What impact has that have on cost?
Well, we went from running 2 generators most of the time down to 0 in the last 2 seasons. So we've reduced it down to that. So they were burning upwards of 250 liters of fuel a day, because one was operating our circus, which is just a bunch of trucks there. So it's just basically idling and producing a bunch of energy that doesn't really get consumed properly. And then one was for one of our studio spaces. So it was on and off, and it wasn't consistently always working because we had two stage spaces. So, but we've been able to tie into the grid on the second one with enough power left over to pick up our circus. So we've been able to save a bunch of diesel and less equipment in the parking lot at the end of the day. So, which is pretty good.
Mm-hmm. And so to follow up on that, this is a bit about the ROI, I guess, but what kind of barriers did you have to overcome? Like, was it hard to convince folks to make the change?
The hardest hurdle we had was because it's a sublease building, we had to go through, various levels of lease ownership because MBS owned the lease. There's a different owner. So we had to deal with the owner and the owner's representative. And then we had to have a power consumption survey done on the building, because it was originally used for for light industrial, so it had a fairly good sized service in it, but the owner didn't really understand what he had, so we had to show him the incoming availability of power and what we could actually pull out of it without doing a lot of work to his building. Basically, we just tied into his high power coming in and transform it ourselves to the power that we wanted. So, but it was a bit of a conversation. There again, they don't understand what they own or what they have, because they're landowners. They're not electricians. They're not power engineers. So we had to show him mathematically and how safely we could pull the power out of the building and use it all from him. He could still charge us for the electricity used on the meter, but we would save a bunch on the other side with like you say, like Chris says, with the diesel costs and all that would drop through the floor to 0 in this case. So it was quite worth it. And the transformer rentals are negligible compared to the cost of renting a generator.
Mm-hmm. Mike, how about you? How did you, was it tough to win people over to batteries? And electric?
It's a little tough, and it continues to be a little tough. Again, it's people are more interested in the exact dollar value rather than you'll probably save a lot. And as we progress through it, they'll start to realize that, yeah, there was a substantial savings here. And it's not only just dollars, we're also dealing with neighborhood impacts where we're not running some noisy generator at 8 o'clock at night while people are trying to put their kids to bed and whatnot. We have a silent unit that's really easy option for us to put in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is really interesting, and let's go into, I guess, where people can find information. So, actually want to ask Katharine this, what are some companies, organizations people can turn to get more information on clean energy solutions?
And so Real Green is the sustainability program that was started out here in BC, and it's now spread across Canada. And Ontario Green Screen is our counterpart over in Ontario. Both programs have quite a bit of information available online. And a couple of years back, we started developing resources that are very specific to clean energy, because as we've discussed today, it's people being afraid of it, not knowing how to talk about it, all those pieces, how do we break down so that it's easy to understand and very approachable? And two of the resources that we created that are available online now include mapping systems, where people can actually log in and report the use of generators. And the purpose of that map is so that we can actually identify hotspots where we're using generators over and over and over again. And the point is to eventually replace those with one of those purpose-built kiosks that we talked about, or finding a way to tie into the grid in that proximate area so that we can get rid of that reporting, and from green it goes to red, or red it goes to green, and we're accessing clean energy instead of a diesel generator. And the other piece is a clean energy resource map, and that's to identify where those tie-in opportunities exist. Because what we are hearing from people out on the ground from the crew was, we would have used it if we'd known it was there. And I think that that's a really important piece. Probably both Jeff or Mike have been in the situation where they showed up and they looked in a closet and they were like, what, there's a whole, they had power here, but nobody thought to ask or access it. And that's a huge loss, right? Because if there is time and will to actually access that, it can make a big difference. So those are two resources that exist through the Clean Energy Committee on our website. And Ontario Green Screen has just released a very similar mapping system so that their crews can start to identify where tie-ins exist. I would say that there's lots of support out there if people are looking for it. And we continue with the Clean Energy Committee over here in BC, where we bring a bunch of different stakeholders together, and we're constantly trying to figure out what resources are missing, what do people need to help us get there.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And I see that a link to the Real Green Clean Energy Toolkit is in the chat. Jeff, how about you? Where have you turned to get more information or the equipment needed for clean energy on set?
Well, we go through either MBS Supplies, or there's a William F. White in Vancouver, our two suppliers for most of our equipment. And then Portable Power is another player in town, which has mostly just battery equipment, and they're trying to get into the game, and they're doing a fairly good job. And then we have numerous sites in downtown Vancouver where we can park circuses now that have grid power available to us. The arenas are available to us, convention centers, and these new kiosks that we have. We've identified, I've been on the committee with the Real Green, so we've identified some other hotspots. And, Mike, and I speak to people like Mike and Hugh Miko, who do some of the larger productions in Vancouver, and the spots they keep hitting. So it's a constant conversation for the Vancouver's got a pretty small community for generator operators, and most of us hate using generators, so we're all happy to tie it into a grid power and just throw a switch every day to turn on the circuits instead of having to deal with diesel generators. So we all work together here to look for those places, and it's difficult sometimes. It's the owners that we have to deal with and trying to convince them that they're going to make money at the end of the day after spending a whole bunch of money to put in this infrastructure for us. So, but it's a slow grind, and we are getting there. And like it's been said, it's way quieter to have a switch turned on than it is have a diesel generator running outside your office or your house in your neighborhood. So, and most of the time we don't use all the power they offer. Like most generators are only, maybe if we're lucky, we're at 3/4 load if we're lucky, but because of the sizing and we have to standardize everything, we don't have much of a choice for the rental, and there's only so many battery packs in Vancouver right now. They're expensive and they're building them as fast as they can afford them, but we'll have to wait until they become more online and more available. So grid power is our first choice to go to before batteries.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think is needed to kind of, I guess, speed up this process of grid tie-in or adopting batteries? Is it the equipment coming online? Is it more resources?
It's a little bit of both. Like there's initiatives in the city of Vancouver for people to supply us with grid power now. It lowers our cost, I believe, on our permits. And so there's an incentive there for productions to go out and try to find grid power for us because we get a discount on our permits. And then maybe the city and the film industries have to come together and find a way to incentivize the putting in of the access points in people's properties. So like, we'll pay part of it, or we'll guarantee you this rate for 5 years, or whatever they need to do to, especially with these bigger locations like downtown Vancouver with these big buildings, they need to find a way to make it so that it's worth their while to put all this equipment in that we're going to access all the time.
Mm-hmm. Chris, how about you? What's the situation from Toronto?
Yeah, I think having more of these tie-in locations come online. I think, if you build it, they'll come. And I think knowing where they are, if you look at our map compared to BC's map at the moment, the Ontario map, I mean, it's there's a lot less tie-ins listed at the moment. So I think we need a lot of community involvement just to come on board and help suss out where those existing tie-ins are. Because certainly there are more of them, I think, than are listed. And then just, as Jeff was saying, working with vendors and property owners to bring more of them online. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess jumping off of that, thinking more like granular to your daily jobs, how can this change, this focus on clean energy come from every department, including performers, let's say, or other members on set? Mike, do you want to start off? Any success stories?
No, I'm not really any success stories, but I mean, you just have to keep the discussion going on, the need for this and the benefits of it, right? And as people see more and more how it works, they're gonna start a dialogue about it, right? And I think that's a good route to get more people on board with it, right? We need the productions from the top down to be on board with the idea of it and look at it from an entire production perspective of this is better for the world, it's better for us, and it's better for the overall budget when you look at it, right? And that all that has to come from the top down.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, how about you? How do you draw in people?
It's the same thing. We open the conversation at the beginning of the production about asking of ways that we can provide, grid power first and budget. I put in my budget for the electric batteries right off the top. When I start my overall budget for the run of the season, I try to convince productions that they should take me on surveys with them at scouting level, not at technical surveys, so that I have an opportunity to review the location and see if there is power available for us, or spots that they're going to put circuses and work and all these work trucks. Can we find places that draw power from to help them out so we don't have to use generators every time? But it's like Mike says, it's a top-down thing, and we need the producers to jump on board and trust us that we're going to do the best job we can for them to ensure that it's as green as possible every time.
Mm-hmm. Katharine, what do you think? How can we kind of have this come from the top or permeate through the industry?
Well, my thoughts on this are, you know, it's constantly everyone saying, well, if they asked for it, then we would have given it to them. And it becomes this big circle. Well, the producer said no, or the PM said no, or the rigging gaffer said no. And I think it's actually about everyone in the crew saying, what can I do to actually lower my fuel consumption here? Do I really need to bring 2 rigging trucks? Could I fit it in one? Do I need to have air conditioning running for 8 hours when I'm in a green room across set? Could I just, as an actor, say, hey, turn off my trailer for 4 hours because I'm not going to be around? I think it's about people asking themselves how they can actually contribute to it, because it can't all fall on the technicians or the producers or the bottom line. It has to be everyone working together. So I would say, you know, I think it's just important for, you know, we've said conversation a bunch of times, but at the beginning of a show, if you look at every single department and you say, how can you reduce? They'll think about it. And if you don't ask them, they won't, because we've always done things in a certain way, and we always will, because we're the film industry. And it's like, oh, we've been doing that since the 60s. So it's not a question. I think that piece is what needs to be addressed, is tasking every individual with how they're going to reduce their fuel consumption, and then people get involved in it. And that's, I think, an important way to look at it.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, building off of that, you know, how is clean energy use changing? Like, what have you seen in the recent past?
I mean, this is probably a better question for Chris, because he's on set and I'm in the office. But I would just say that the only thing that I've noticed is when you tell people that it's an option, they prefer it, right? Even if you were to go to an actor and say, hey, you can have this trailer that's powered by solar, or you could have this one that's going to have a generator burning outside your window, like, which one are they going to pick? I think that if you give them the option, they're going to take the cleaner energy, because I don't think there's many people who are no longer invested in sustainability at this point. But I don't know, Chris, what are you seeing on set?
Yeah, I agree with, I think it's all about just engaging with people and having conversations. And I think it's bringing it up in your initial production meetings, you know, that it's a goal of the production. That's what I learned last summer on my production, was that when we just engaged our crew in conversation, people started brainstorming and collaborating together in a room or in a Zoom, and also on their own. And people would bring ideas to us. So much of, you know, producing and managing a production is leaning on your department heads for their areas of expertise. And if you task those department heads with sustainability as part of the process of how they do their job, you'll start seeing that solutions are just being brought to you, you know, and having some of these sort of North Stars, the resources that we put in the chat to point at, will help get people started. But so much of it will trickle down just from that initial conversation.
Yeah. And speaking of, you know, the ROI of all of this, Mike, I know you mentioned a bit about not just the effect on energy use, but, you know, the whole environment, neighborhood. So yeah, what do you see as the main ROI when we switch to clean energy?
I don't know. I think it's really just about taking care of the planet and dealing with, you know, that end of it, as far as I'm concerned. Burning less diesel, you know, and just running a cleaner world, basically. You know, it's not a great thing that we're burning millions and millions of liters a day in between cars and generators and everything. It's not helping us. And, you know, global warming and everything, it's all evidence of that. So whatever little bit we can do, we're going to better everything.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think I have about 5 minutes till we go to Q&A. So I wanted to focus on, you know, kind of like what we can do now and in the future. Jeff, wanted to start with you. You know, for somebody who's going to work tomorrow, like, what is achievable right now with the technology we have?
Well, with the technology we have batteries available, the bigger ones that we can use that will, like Mike did, and we have to make sure that they're never sitting idle anywhere. We have to make sure they're out on set, always working. And then we have to talk to our director of photographies and our production designers and make sure they're on board. They want to save some money and they want to be a greener world, so that we use smaller, more LED fixtures, and we use small battery packs for exterior work where we can. So we try to reduce the load out of set. You know, for exterior walk and talks and things like this, you know, you don't have to light the world every time if you don't need to. Try to be mindful of that. Where we go to locations, try to get access to as much power that they're willing to let us tap off, be it tying it into their power with our own electricians, or their electricians taking our equipment and putting it in for us. That way we can always, you know, reduce that way. And there again, and just encouraging them to use, like with the battery powered cars, if you're running a diesel generator at a circus, you're only running it, it has to idle at a certain speed and it has to generate a certain amount of electricity automatically. There's a minimum it generates. So there's a bunch of energy we never use, which is probably, we can pull that back in by charging our electric cars right off that generator. I know it sounds kind of backwards, but if we're generating 225 amps minimum and we're only using 175 of them, we have 50 amps every hour we're not using. So we might as well put that into an electric car battery while it sits there and idles and keeps our circuits hot or warm or cold or whatever it's doing that day. So these are things that it's hard to press on people. They don't quite understand this. Mike understands it. I understand it. Any electrician will understand it. You know, that the machine has to run at a certain speed in order to maintain its output. And we don't ever use that energy. So there's a bunch of energy we're wasting, which we can harness back into battery cells and electric cars and things. So it's encouraging that sort of understanding and thinking that, you know, we're not doing something crazy here. We're, you know, we can show them graphically that we haven't used any extra diesel fuel all week, and yet we've charged 5 electric cars all week and harnessed all that energy.
Right. So a lot of achievable stuff right now. Chris, you're just coming off of a production. Yeah, what do you think? What's achievable right now?
I think, I mean, we've talked so much about sort of the ways, you know, you can reduce fuel consumption, and I think all those are achievable right now. And I think just getting people to commit, you know, that it's not hard to find reasons that some of these things are challenging, or that some of them maybe don't make super obvious sense right away if you look at the bottom line. But I think it's worth asking ourselves, like, what are the risks if we don't start moving towards more sustainable habits in filmmaking? What are the risks if we just continue to burn fuel the way we have been? And I think if we take that approach and sort of that framing in our minds, I think it's obvious that we sort of have to make these changes.
Thanks. So we're getting some audience questions in. So I'll start with one. Is there a minimum amount of prep / shooting days that you consider before asking location owners to reconfigure power access to allow tie-ins? For instance, will you push that agenda if you will be at a location for a total of 1 prep, 1 shoot, 1 wrap? How intensive is it to push for this? I guess let's start with Chris.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think, you know, in an instance where you're there for 1 or 2 days and there's not an existing tie-in that you can tap into, it might be something where you look towards, you know, your UPS battery packs, you know, as opposed to a tie-in, in the event that there's truly nothing that you can tie into, unless it's sort of like a $20,000, you know, tie-in version, which I've learned is rarer. But you could be in a situation like that. And so that's a situation where you treat it as if you were on location and lean into your UPS battery packs as much as you could. But what I also have learned is that when you really go into a location or scout with tie-in in mind, you can have some happy discoveries. There's more out there than you think.
Jeff, you've probably had to do this. What's your perspective?
I'm like Chris. Most light industrial buildings do have power available for us. Not all of them, but a lot of them do. And the tie-in cost is either their electrician or we have our own electricians here in Vancouver. So we can just run in there and do our own tie-ins. And the impact to the owner is on a 1-day shoot, you can do it in the prep day or the day before, because hopefully the production is locked down the location before the 1-day prep. So if it's 5 days out, you've got 5 days to have their electrician or our electrician go in there and do this tie-in electrically safe, either after hours or whatever means we have to do it. And it's doable. The big problem we have is that a lot of people don't know what they have available. So we have to go in there and, take a risk and a calculation to see if there's enough power in there to do it. So it is doable on most of them. And like Chris said, or else we lean back on, we go back to the electric generator if it's really a hard sell, or like a large house where they just don't have that much power in it and we're going to be filming around it all day. You want to probably just use the electric batteries. But most light industrial, they can accommodate us.
Another question, is there an easy and quick calculation that production can provide to home and or business owners that may help demonstrate the cost benefit to tie-ins? I'll actually start with Katharine. Do you know of any such resources, or how
Oh
easy
man,
it is
I
to
knew
calculate?
I knew you were gonna peg me with that one, and I was like, don't ask me that. I think the complication here is that what we're trying to sell to like a home or business owner, to Jeff's point, if you have a light industrial property, it's not that big of a deal to do something like that. To try to convince, a small mom and pop shop to open up their panel and get in there, there isn't an immediate cost benefit to them. There's a benefit to the production. They will break even. And I think the important thing is they have to look at the benefits of the impact of actually filming there. So something that I like to look at when we're talking about, big high rises downtown Vancouver, those companies also have a mandate to be environmentally sustainable. So if they support the motion picture industry by providing something like a tie-in, eliminate the diesel generator running outside their doorways while their tenants are coming in and out, make themselves a friend to industry and, provide that option, that's the benefit to them. There is ways to bring the cost back as well. There's rentals of that kind of equipment that can be charged to the production that can help pay for itself over time. But I don't have a quick calculation on hand. Each situation is very different. And that's why the conversations are sometimes hard, which I think Jeff can speak to. Everyone has a different rate for power. Ontario's power is different than our power. Like there isn't a one size fits all solution, but there's ways to actually make it feasible by making sure that you have all the information available to them when you're speaking to it.
Yeah, Jeff, what's your perspective?
Well, one of the obvious things is that the generator is missing. So we're saving on our rental costs, and there's a fuel costs and a driver driving around with a truck filling up the diesel. So those are the obvious things automatically off the top. We go to a grid power. We don't have a diesel generator running, so we're saving upwards of 250 liters a day. We don't have a man in a pickup truck driving around with diesel in the back of it that we're filling into that generator all day long. So, those costs right off the top are significant. And then the carbon footprint, because the generator will be running and it won't be used at its maximum potential. So we'll be wasting a bunch of fuel and producing carbon. But that's a hard sell. You have to show people that. But there is no easy graph or picture you can show them. It's just that at the end of the day, somebody's got to take someone's word that this is probably a much cleaner option.
Yeah. Mike, what do you think? In terms of calculating cost savings, or how do you sell this?
Well, I mean, a lot of times it just requires an explanation. If you're selling it to a property owner, promoting the idea of putting in some power for it, it's like everybody thinks electricity is really expensive. They get their bill at their house and they're like, oh my God, my power bill is so high. But it's not in the grand scheme of things. If your power costs you $100 a day, it'd be $3,000 a month, $6,000 every 2 months in the billing cycle. People don't pay that kind of horrendous power bills, right? But lots of productions are accustomed to paying companies $150 a day for a switch, right? That's pretty good money for electricity. And if that was explained to people, I think they would get that, right? It's not that hard of a sell. And it's easy to figure out the power consumption and what it actually really costs.
Mhm.
It's listed on their power bill, how much they're paying per kilowatt hour. And from an electrician's perspective, that's a pretty easy calculation as to what it's going to cost generally, to run a set for a day.
Right. And Chris, in terms of cost calculations, like how easy was it on that production?
Challenging to start, and then once we got into it and sort of built and had a week or two of data to analyze, it was pretty easy. It became part of just sort of our normal flow of tracking costs and doing hot costs, and it was really simple once we accepted it and got on board with it and integrated it into our existing system. And then, I think all of this needs to be looked at with sort of the umbrella of like, what is the cost and risk if we don't take some of this action and do some of this, and I think like we've all just gone through productions and are going through productions amidst the COVID pandemic, and it's like, I think in that instance, in we're still going through it, it was sort of like certain costs had to increase so that we could keep going because it was too costly not to, and I think it's somewhat different for sure, but I think there's a shade of that exists here too, that if we don't take action to get our CO2 emissions down on set, the risk and cost of not doing that is well beyond the cost of doing it.
Mm-hmm. I have another question about training. Are electricians trained to incorporate clean energy, tie-ins, batteries, etc., into the power they set up for productions? Jeff, do you want to start off?
Yeah, we have a certain percentage in Vancouver that are certified electricians, not just film technicians, and so they are certified and trained to do these sort of tie-ins for us, and they're all covered, with insurance and productions backing them. So it's something we're well qualified to do here in Vancouver. I don't know about Ontario. I can't speak for Ontario's rules and regulations, but in Vancouver, we do have electricians within our union, and most productions have them on staff that can do these sort of things for us.
Mm-hmm. Chris, what's the situation in Ontario?
I've seen it both ways, where you have people on staff, and then also where you bring in a third party to come and do a tie-in for you, which can be pretty cost effective in a lot of scenarios.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Another question, technical. Has anybody already experimented using the electric car plug for power on set, or the mobile car battery?
In Vancouver, the large batteries on trailers, they are designed to go to those car charging systems, and you can take two of them and plug it in, and it'll help charge it in about 6 hours, as fast chargers.
Wow.
So they are using them to a degree. They're trying to use them for charging up the battery and then taking the battery somewhere else. So, and they're everywhere, so you can take it just about anywhere and plug it in. So.
Michael, Chris, have you seen this?
I haven't actually seen them plug it in. I know that the large units are like Jeff says, are compatible to plug into the chargers, right? When I use them, we charge them straight off the diesel generators, but we weren't in an area that had car chargers that we could take it to.
Yeah, here at my studio in Toronto, we've installed, I think, 8 EV chargers around the building, and we use them to charge the volt stacks and UPS oftentimes, but mainly for our electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles. And we would just have someone in transport who would, their job was to help make sure we were circulating all the electric cars so everyone got their charge for the day. And then in the same way, we would just know where the nearest hospital is, or people would just know that would be on the call sheet. People would just know where the nearest gas station is, and the nearest electric charger for your EV cars during production. Because oftentimes that becomes a barrier of like, well, where are the chargers? So it's quite easy to solve that if you just, make it a point to do so.
Mhm. Thanks for that. That's really interesting, the way that tech is being used in all of these fields. I have another question about motivation. Someone's asking this question for Chris, but I think I would like Mike also to jump in. Toronto is a massive construction site. How best to motivate hardworking, exhausted technicians who are working long hours in sometimes extreme weather, often at night. How do you keep the environment at the forefront when working conditions are hard sometimes? Chris, do you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's a really good question. I think so often production, especially on a long production, can be all consuming and draining. I think so it's a fair question to ask, how to keep people motivated when people are struggling to even care for themselves, I think is how the question was phrased. So yeah, it's almost a good reason for pause and reflection just on like what lifestyle in our industry. I think one of the silver linings through the pandemic has been the majority of productions have been, or had at least been attempting to do shorter hours, just so people have more time for rest and to keep their immune systems healthy. And so I think under a similar umbrella of thought and consideration is where lies the sort of the pulse for motivation, for keeping the environment top of mind. It's because it's where we live. It's all we have at the end of the day. And so in the same way that we would do education, for our crews, and are still doing education for people when they're onboarded onto a specific production, for health and safety, I think that sustainability practices should be looped in a similar way into health and safety meetings and into the onboarding of people onto on a specific production to give them some base level education on the importance of it.
Wow, yeah, thanks for that answer. It's a great way to round out this discussion and really bring it back to why we're doing this. I see that we've hit 4 p.m. So we are at the end of this discussion. I'm going to hand it back to Katie now.
Hello, hi everyone. I want to thank Jeff, Chris, Katharine, Mike, and Anayat for today's conversation. Thank you so much for going over those resources with us and sharing your experience. That was really, really excellent and very helpful. And another thank you to our partners at MBS Canada for presenting this session.